Marvel Cinematic Universe, and what the whole phase business is about. We're going to briefly go over phase 1, why these phases are important. Yeah, so let's kick it off. What are the phases?
So there's currently
and what's
2
the point
phases,
of them?
and there's going to be a 3rd phase coming up soon. So we have to go all the way back to the original Iron Man. So the whole film happened. We saw it from start to finish. I really enjoyed it. It was a great film. And then right at the very end, Nick Fury turns up, and he tells Iron Man about the Avengers initiative. We all get excited in the cinema because something special is about to happen. And now we're hooked into not a standalone Marvel film, but without knowing it, a Marvel universe has just been created purely by chucking Nick Fury in.
And it's exciting. It's actually the change in what sort of cinema we're going to get for a while, because we're used to sort of films that maybe have little nods to each other, but this is something different. This is going to be, characters interlinking, individual characters meeting in groups for all sorts of crazy stuff. So this is the idea of these phases, is that they're going to be introducing us as an audience to the idea of having changes in our cinema. It's not always the same characters live all the time. Things are going to change, just like in the comics of the Marvel universe.
And it's introducing each character to us slowly, and the good idea about the phases is there's a break, something happens, you wrap up one phase and you can move on to the next stage where it gets to bigger and better, or kind of there's more danger and stuff. The world has changed according to the Marvel
we find
universe.
More happening in phase 2 particularly.
Yeah, compared
and
to
probably
phase
a
1,
lot more in phase 3.
Yeah, so a lot of the actions will kind of ripple through, like in the comic books where something would happen and it rippled through to the next kind of episode or the next publication, and then in some crossovers you would have again the same sort of thing. So this now brought it to cinema world, so people weren't used to seeing something like this, to see 6, 7 films all kind of linked together somehow, even if it is just literally post credit scenes up until we get into the films where they really start to introduce the characters and give them the whole, put them all together really.
And we should note as well, at this stage, the idea of using the heroes from the comic books, and the idea of changing stories, just as the comic books and interlinking stories. But it should be noted that these films aren't following the actual comic books themselves. They're unique in themselves. They're going to have changes and developments that are unique to the cinema. So they're not trying to mirror the actual comic books. They're actually doing something artistically. They have to put a lot of work and thought into these films to get them to interlink and making new stories.
Yes. So
and of course,
with the characters, the ones that they own obviously, and the ones they don't own, they have to kind of give original stories for those reasons as well, to kind of not overstep the boundary and not kind of implode over 20th Century Fox's kind of rights, or up until recently, obviously all of Spider-Man stuff. So they've done it so well where these characters can live in a brand new world, and yet they don't overstep their mark where they can get sued, which I think is what could have happened if they just went in with the Avengers and said, you know what, Spider-Man's an Avenger, Wolverine's an Avenger, and there would have been lawsuits and stuff everywhere. And then why not? Why not make Superman an Avenger?
Yeah. For anyone that doesn't know, obviously, I believe X-Men and Spider-Man are part of the Marvel comic universe, but obviously they're licensed out to other people at the moment. That's what you were just saying. So we're expecting to see Spider-Man in phase 3, because the licensing is finally moving over. So we're expecting to see Spider-Man in the Marvel Cinematic Universe fairly soon. Within how many years would you say?
Next year, Civil War. So we'd expect to see him from next year.
And also another thing that confuses me a bit sometimes is we sometimes think of this sort of these comic book movies as all being together because they're all comic book heroes. But actually, there's two distinct companies. Is that right? You've got Marvel Universe and we've got DC Universe.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
So
DC owns stuff like Batman, Superman.
Yeah. So in case you're wondering why Batman and Superman aren't turning up in the Marvel Universe, because they're actually DC Universe. They're a separate company.
They're in Metropolis and Gotham, respectively, so they can't come across.
Yeah, and DC Universe has some very strong, iconic characters, but it doesn't seem to have as many, I think, sort of famous characters as Marvel Universe. So probably where you're going to get a lot more interesting crossovers in the Marvel Universe. But obviously we're expecting a DC Universe crossover as well.
Yeah, with Suicide Squad and Batman vs Superman.
Batman vs Superman, that's very interesting, but just remember, those are separate things, they're not part of the Marvel Universe.
They're not part of Phase 1 or Phase 3 or 5 or whatever.
They're unlikely to turn up at all, although, you know, they have done crossover video games, so, you know, one day, maybe. But not within the foreseeable future. Okay, so the phases overall, we're talking about phases, so we've explained, hopefully explained what these phases are, what the idea is. We're going into a Marvel comic sort of style where we get crossover characters going into each other's movies and actually making their own movies properly, not just in a tacky, I'm in your movie, it's funny, isn't it, haha. This is actually linking things up. But the actual phases themselves, what are the purpose of the individual phases, do you think? We've got phase 1, the idea of phase, I think, is the fact that they're actually getting us as an audience to understand
the buy-in as well.
That, yeah, and sort of realise that things are going to change and all that sort of thing. So phase 1 is actually, I think phase 1, would you say, I would say personally that phase 1 is introducing us to the idea of interlinking movies.
And characters, yeah.
Do you agree with that?
Definitely, yeah. Because the first two Marvel movies literally just had a tiny cutscene at the very end to introduce or give us the idea that something bigger is out there. When you see Nick Fury at the very end of Iron Man, you've got the scene at the end of Hulk as well, the Incredible Hulk, with Ed Norton. And it was to kind of just pave the way that something will come soon, depending on how well everything does. And of course, Iron Man broke box office records for Marvel, and since then, obviously, everything got green-lighted, and we've obviously got phase 1 because of that. And then they had to quickly green-light Captain America, Thor, because while they are huge superheroes, a lot of people don't know their origin story, so why not give them their own kind of start off, and they all got their own individual films from them.
And they all did well.
And then they all come together in Joss Whedon's Avengers Assembled.
Yes, so that's sort of the pivot point of this phase 1, is when you finally get to see them all come together. And you love that movie, I know.
I love it.
I found it a bit loose still, but by the time they reach the next one, they've got a solid thing going. But you know, they were in new territory, so props to them. And then we move straight on to phase 2. Then we've been told, you know, we've been taught that we're going to have origin stories, and then we're going to have the superheroes coming together in an Avengers film. And then in phase 2, what does phase 2 mean? What are they trying to tell us in this phase as an audience?
So I guess you have to have an end. You have a beginning, middle, and end, like with all things, right? So what they've done is they've taken their films and they've turned the 7 of them in the first example, and they said this is all phase 1. So the start of them, you know, Iron Man kickstarts the whole, the Avengers and everything will start if this film does well, and then we end with the big Avengers film, which everybody wants to see. All superheroes get together and kind of just battle it out and save the world. And then, you know, let's take a breather, because what we just saw was something really spectacular, so why not break it into a second phase? And And that's kind of where we've got to. Where we got to the end of Avengers. We saw these huge set pieces. We see all the characters come together, and then we think, let's take a break. Let them go off and live their lives. They all do that.
Okay.
They go off and do their own thing, and we get to see what they're doing. And then let's bring them back in one more time, and let's take a break. And I quite like the way that it should end at the end of an Avengers film, because then they can go back to normal after doing this crazy outing with the boys, with their mates back on Earth, and then just go back to doing what they're doing. I think that's what I like about the breaks in the phases, because they break at a good time, really.
Yeah. Phase 2, it does follow the same sort of pattern as Phase 1. Obviously, it has individual films. They connect together, and they have a big Avengers film in there as well. The thing I think that they're trying to show us with Phase 2 seems to be that we can actually lose a character, because we lose a big character in the second Avengers film.
We also lose Agent Coulson in Avengers 1, and he is quite key in the Iron Man world, and he makes appearances throughout the kind of like series as a whole. So Josh Whedon did kill him off, but then obviously Marvel brought him back to life. We did lose Quicksilver, like you said, in again Josh Whedon's film. So we do lose a main character, but it seems just when Josh Whedon directs, everyone else keeps them all alive. Because Winter Soldier didn't die at the end of Winter Soldier. Well, the Mandarin did, so there is no more Mandarin.
Of course, there's a change in S.H.I.E.L.D. as well, isn't there?
Yes, it dismantles at the end of, or midway through Phase 2, which is quite interesting, because you'd kind of think it would happen at the end. Such a big, iconic part of the Marvel Universe, but it happens midway through. And then instead of addressing it straight away with another film, we've still got the TV show that addresses it. We go straight into Guardians, and you're not expecting Guardians of the Galaxy, and it just kind of like took you by storm. It was just a great film, great fun.
Yeah. Oh, I suppose it introduced us to the outer space sort of area of Marvel as well, then. Yeah.
By doing that, so we've got in Phase 2, we've kind of opened the door up to something even bigger, and they showed us that not only things happen here, we've got Asgard, and now you've got the other areas and other planets
different
as well.
worlds and things going on. And in case you don't know what S.H.I.E.L.D. is, S.H.I.E.L.D. is a sort of good guy organisation. Hydra is a bad guy organisation. And what's going on in Phase 2 is a swap over where Hydra is sort of infiltrating S.H.I.E.L.D. and sort of they're becoming a big power, and it's going to have a lot of influence on the Phase 3 films, and that really they're going to be in power. There's going to be a lot of stuff going on with them. Okay, so I personally think we've briefly explained what the phases are in the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Yeah, and I think it was Kevin's idea originally to kind of be part of the whole Marvel franchise from the start. So if you're thinking Marvel Universe, that's one part, but if you're thinking to every Marvel film pretty much made, going back to X-Men, not so much Blade but more X-Men onwards, he was pretty much executive producer or associated producer throughout the whole thing, so he's had a handle on the whole Marvel world from then. So it's
definitely seems to be his vision.
Yes, that we're following and then we're seeing come to life.
And he's holding it all together, and he's definitely the one making sure it happens the way that it should happen. So I think we can put a lot of the success of this project down to him. So Phase 3, we're looking forward to Spider-Man. I personally, that's all I'm looking forward to. We've got the Civil War stuff going on.
Infinity Wars after that.
Ant-Man, who seemed like a bit of an out there character, is turning up in these things as well. You know, he's not actually as far out there as you think, because he's going to be in these films as well. Pretty crazy stuff.
Henna, that's right. So that's our review of Phase 1 and Phase 2, and kind of just an explanation of the phases as a whole.
Yeah, I hope it helps. Because when I first heard this, I was like, what? I don't know what's going on with this. And it really is quite interesting. quite cool.